name is Andres Ruiz. On today's show, our guest is a pastor, and I myself would call him a great motivational speaker because he inspired the heck out of me. This man has been through adversity in his life. At the age of 12, his father and mother were abusive alcoholics who became addicted to drugs. At the age of 17, his best friend was killed by his stepfather, and he himself became a drug dealer. At age 24, his mother was murdered, and at age 29, he attempted suicide by overdosing. And at the age of 30, Jesus saved his life forever. He received the Benz Bells Award, and also the Tucson Police Department gang unit gave him an award as well. So I'd like to welcome to the show one of the most inspirational speakers I've ever seen in my life, Pastor Frank Romero. How you doing, man?
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, man.
Thank
So,
you. It's a pleasure.
man, the first time that I saw you speak, I was blown away, honestly. I love motivational speaking because I'm a motivational speaker myself. So I really appreciate the craft. You know, anytime I see somebody speak, I love it, especially when you have stories.
Yes.
Stories are so powerful. Tell us a little bit about yourself when you were growing up.
You know, I grew up in the streets of LA. I lived in California all my life as a teenager. I grew up in the projects, not really, knowing what the life was all about. You got to understand first. You know, growing up, I had a real good life till about the age of 7 years old. My father had a good job. My mother had a good job. My dad built a couple of houses, had a restaurant, so we were doing real good. But through that's when they started drinking real heavily. They started putting the alcohol before their children, before their family. Before you knew it, we lost everything. We ended up in the projects, not knowing how to live in the projects, what kind of, it's a whole different world when you're not used to that kind of stuff. I remember moving in, I remember bringing our toys, and I'm telling you, in less than a week, because we didn't have anywhere to put the toys but outside on the porch, all them toys were gone, because there's kids there in the projects that have nothing, Also growing up in the streets, going to school back and forth, getting beat up, getting jumped by other gang members. I had no understanding of gangs back then. Eventually it pulled me into the gang lifestyle. When it pulled me into the gang lifestyle, I remember saying, I'll never be abused again. So it turns you into a very hateful, bitter person. You start reaching out to drugs and alcohol to take away that pain, to numb that pain that's inside of you. And so through all that, I ended up being a very hateful and bitter person. I remember my father and my mother eventually getting divorced. I remember not having, any kind of love at home. Even though my dad would tell us that he loved us when he was drunk, and my mother never said she loved us. I grew up to be very hateful and bitter, and so I really didn't care what happened to me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Growing up, you started in the gangs yourself.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that, how it all started.
At the age of 12 years old, I had left my house because I was already a gang member by this time. They had tried to kill me, and I had left, and I was gone actually for a couple of years. Went to Romero, New Mexico. I was out there working out in the fields. I lived with a woman at the age of 12 years old. At this time, as time went by the age of 15 years old, I ended up coming back to California. I came back. I moved in with my mother. She said that everything would change, everything would be better, but it was just a lie, and nothing changed. It was still the same. Got more involved in gangs, got more into stealing drugs, violence. Through all that, I ended up, at the age of 17 years old, I was so much into the gangs that, the gang members would walk around with me and flaunt me around because I was willing to do what other guys weren't willing to do. Yet, the guy that I walked around with, he was a big time, OG. He was a veterano, what they called. He was already 34 years old, been in and out of prison. He was one of the main guys in the prison yards. He was one of the main guys in the gangs. I remember seeing this guy stab a guy in the heart 7 times for honking at him. You know what I mean? And just different situations like that. So because of that, the other gang members started kind of retaliating, kind of got more hate towards me because of that. In 1983, in August, I remember August 2nd of 1983, my stepfather and my best friend got into an argument. My stepfather pulled out a weapon, he pulled out a weapon, they both pulled out weapons. As they pulled out the weapons, my best friend's gun got jammed, and my stepfather shot him 9 times in the chest. And you know, at that moment, at that time, I'm standing there, and it looks like a movie. You know, I'm watching the guy. He has no shirt on. He has a rifle in his hand. My stepfather's shooting him. He's turning around like in circles, like a movie. He falls down. Everything looks like slow motion. It's not something that a kid should go through, especially at the age of 17 years old, you know. And so through that, you know, there was a hit put on me. They thought that I had something to do with the murder because at 2 o'clock in the morning, my mother shows up, sees the body laying there, starts calling out my name. The police had taken me in because I'm all full of blood. I'm holding this man in my arms, not knowing what happened. By the time I came back, they told me I would be dead. They tried to kill me right there and then at that time in front of the police, in front of everybody. I had to run through the crowd, get out of there. 2 days later, I end up here in Tucson. And as I end up here in Tucson, you know, I really don't know anybody. I start getting involved, you know, in drug dealing, looking for work. I worked out in the pecans, picking pecans, you know, at 25 cents a pound, you know. I started working as a dishwasher. I had a man at the Arizona Inn give me a job as a dishwasher. It was funny because I gave him my application, and it was all graffiti because I didn't know how to write. So I graffitied it, and he looked at it and he says, "Is this the way you write?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "I'll make you a deal." He goes, "You come in." He goes, "an hour early," or he goes, or leave an hour early. He knew I had just gotten married. I was 17 years old. Yeah. And he goes, "Bring your wife in." He goes, "You guys can sit down, eat breakfast or eat lunch." He goes, "But for a whole hour, I want you to do your ABCs." He goes, and he goes, "I'll give you a job. It'll be on our time." And so he ended up giving me a job. And from there, I started, you know, learning how to be a prep cook, how to cook, and through all that, you know, I ended up, you know, I make my little extra money selling dope, you know, here and there, a little bit of drugs here and there, and eventually started getting bigger and bigger, and to the point where, you know, I had guys coming up to me and selling for me, and you know, and people were looking up to me. I was a president of Sophisticated Few Card Club. I was in Unique Image Card Club, Latin Gents Card Club. Every card club actually asked for something better, you know what I mean? So because of it, believe it or not, you know, you get kind of big-headed, you know what I mean? You get kind of big-headed. I always tell people I was like the guy from Jack in the Box, you know what I mean? My head was about this big, but it was just full of hot air, you know what I mean? But you know, the thing was that I always wanted to help people. So it was one of those kind of things where I was always being that Robin Hood kind of guy, you know what I mean? If somebody needed food, I'd buy them food. If somebody needed clothes, I'd buy them clothes. If they needed shoes, I'd buy them shoes. There was nothing that people didn't need that I wouldn't do for them. Yeah. You know, even to the point where my wife would ask me, because I'd take people's checks and people's food stamps and everything for drugs, you know? And my wife would say, why do you do that? You know, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't sell what you have. And I said, because if I don't take it, somebody else will. The difference was between other people and me was that the next day, after they were all broke and all hung over, I would go and I'd fill up the refrigerators with food. And my wife would ask me, "Why do you do that?" I said, "Because it's not the kid's fault that the parents are addicted to drugs." So, you know, I would see myself as doing something good, but at the same time, I was doing it, you know, with the bad, you know, what I was doing wasn't right. I understand that now. I didn't understand it back then. Yeah. See, because when you come out of that kind of lifestyle, you believe that when you do stuff like that, as long as you're helping somebody, you're doing right. But it's not. It doesn't really work out that way, because at the end, it'll turn around and bite you. You know what I mean? It'll turn around and bite you. And so, through all that, you know, I ended up, you know, going through a divorce at the age of 21. I ended up meeting my beautiful wife, Roxy, now. At the age of 24 years old. Now, you know, my wife's completely different. She's half German, half Mexican, beautiful woman, never touched a drug in her life. You know, maybe a cooler here and there, but really never touched alcohol, really never, you know, she's never smoked, she's never done any kind of drug whatsoever, you know. I always make fun of her because I always tell her, you know, Tylenol is the strongest thing she's ever taken. And then she tells me, she says, "Well, I didn't know what hot dog, Kool-Aid, and top ramen was until I met you," you know. So, you know, it was one of those kind of things, you know. She grew up in a good home. Yeah. Her sister works for the probation office. Her brother was a sergeant for the Wilmot prison, and all her cousins are TPD officers. So it's a whole different lifestyle, compared to me.
Yeah.
She's a country girl, ropers and wranglers, you know what I mean? And versus me, Dickies and flannels and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
She liked trucks, I like lowriders,
Yeah.
And so it was a big difference. But that just goes to show you that when people say, "Oh, we're not compatible," that's a lie. You're not supposed to be compatible. You know what I mean? Because that's what makes me and her right for each other. You know what I mean?
Balance.
Yeah, there's a balance, because when I'm wrong, she's right. And that's just the way it is. And when I'm right, she's wrong. And so we balance each other out. We've been married for 27 years. We still go out on dates. We still enjoy being with each other, even though I put her through hell, because I did put her through hell. I was a very abusive husband. And it wasn't because she was wrong. It wasn't because she was a bad person. Because to me, she's never been a bad person.
Yeah.
She's always been, to me, she was my angel that saved me. That's the way I see it. But the thing is that going through everything that we went through, the only thing I knew was abuse. So if anybody spoke back to me, I would have to, hey, stop. You know what I mean? And I would, and that was the way I reacted. Since I was abused all my life, I had been molested, I had been beaten, I had been treated so bad growing up that nobody was ever going to hurt me in any kind of way. So if I felt any kind of abuse, any kind of hurt, anything coming my way, I would stop it any way I had to, because you weren't going to treat me that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so through that, the craziest thing about it is that my wife had this beautiful, beautiful smile that today I can say it's there. But at one time, she had this beautiful smile. She was always laughing. And I said, you know what? That's what I want. But I'm going to tell you something, that you can take away that happiness, that joy away from someone just because of your own bitterness. Because I had gone through so much in my life that I took away that happiness that she had. That one day I was looking at her, and I remember, crying out to her and telling her, after I'd given my life to Christ, saying, look, this is, what God's done in my life. He's restored me. And as I'm doing that, she just looks at me very serious, and I seen her swallow. Now that's something that I used to do. Instead of crying, instead of weeping, instead of anything, I would just swallow. When there was pain, I would swallow. And you know what I'm talking about, when you have that pain, that knot in your throat, and I would swallow. And at that time when she did that, I really believed that it was God that showed me. He showed me I wasn't looking at her face, but I looked straight at her throat, and I seen her swallow, and he said, that's who you were. That's who you were. And so there was a process there. So in 1996, when I came to the church and when I started coming to the door, I seen what I would see the people worshiping and lifting up their hands, and I was just looking at it, man, what's up with all these Bible thumpers? You know what I mean? What's all with all these people? And so I would hear stories. I would hear stories of lives being changed and lives being restored. And I said, there's no way. There's no way. People don't understand what I've been through. They don't understand the pain that's gone through me in my life. You know what I mean? And so I had a man come up to me one day, and he's talking to me, and he says, he's trying to tell me what God can do and all this. And he goes, look, man, he goes, you got to understand. He goes, it's kind of like if your mother would have gotten murdered.
Oh, okay? Wow.
So when he said these things to me, I looked at him and I said, you don't understand. My mother was murdered. See, my mother was shot in the face with a shotgun. I had to go and clean up her home. Do you understand what it's like? Do you understand what it's like to be abused? Do you understand what it's like to be molested at the age of 7, at the age of 9 years old? Do you understand what it's like not to be told that you're loved as you're growing up? It's kind of crazy, but we look at it, we see the abuse in other countries, and but we don't understand that here in America we have so much abuse. Children are going through abuse, and children will take that to their adulthood, and it really affects them in their adulthood. And it's not something that you leave behind. It's something that you take it, you carry it with you for the rest of your life. And so all these things, I was like, how can these people tell me that my life can change because I gave my life to Christ? Oh, Jesus, come into my heart and everything's going to change. So a night before I started going to the church, we had been going for about 3 months now. I would go because my wife wanted to go, my kids wanted to go. And I would go, and I remember being at home, and I'm smoking a joint outside of the house, and I start yelling at God and saying, you know what, show me how real you are, because I've never seen you, I've never felt you. You know, and through the process of that, I ended up going to church the next following day, and I would always smoke a joint before I walked into the church, where I wouldn't have to pay attention to them. But again, you pay more attention when you're doing something like that, you know. So I'd walk into the church, I smoked a joint. I remember I wouldn't want to sit down because I didn't want people stretching out their hands towards me. You know, I had, like I said, I had earrings coming down, I had these loops coming down, I had a goatee, I had a big old long tail, I dressed up like a cholo all my life, you know, and so I didn't want people wanting to pray for me, so I would go and stand against the wall. And I had a friend, he's a friend of mine now, Marty Carnegie. He came down from London, and he was preaching, and I didn't know the man at the time, and he's preaching, and as he would preach, he would look my way. I said, man, who is this guy that's looking at me? You know, did I sell him some bad stuff? What, you know, what happened? You know, and so as time, you know, he continues to preach, and he looks at me the second time, and I'm like, man, you know, so I'm really getting riled up, kind of like, you know, I'm gonna get this guy in the parking lot. You know, I'm thinking, and the third time he looks at me, he says, come here, and he apologizes to the church in the middle of a sermon. He apologizes to the church. He stops the service, and he says, I have to do this now. God is telling me to do this now. So as I walk up to him, you know, I walk up to him because I'm going to show everybody that I'm not afraid. I don't believe in nothing that he's saying anyway. So I walk up to him, and as I walk up to him, he says, you want to know if God is real. You know, the night that was my thing, was that the night before I'm challenging God. And so as he says these words, you know, I don't act surprised or anything, you know, I'm just kind of like, all right, yeah, all right, you know, whatever. And he leans over and he says, I don't know what this means. He says, but you know what it means. And God knows what it means. And as he leans over, he whispered something in my ear. And up to this day, I don't remember what he whispered. But as he whispered in my ear, I remember seeing my life before my eyes. Like they say, you know, when you die, you'll see your life before your eyes. I'm going to tell you, I seen every bad thing I had done just flashed before my eyes. So as he said that, I stood back, and I, you know, automatically, bad high. That's what I'm thinking. You know, it was a bad high, you know, and then he looks at me and he says, you don't understand. He goes, the same way people follow you for the devil, they're going to follow you for Jesus Christ. And I started to laugh because I thought it was the funniest thing in the world, you know. And so as he said that, you know, because I know I had no education. I knew I didn't know how to read, you know. I knew how to read the Cat in the Hat. And thank God I tell people I don't read the Bible like I read the Cat in the Hat, because we'd all have a problem. You know what I mean? But, you know, even up to today, I could say, you know, I'm not the greatest reader in the world, and I can't really spell that much. But you know what? Whatever happens, God had a purpose for it. And so as he said these things, I kind of laughed. And he says, you have a calling to preach the gospel, man. And so I just kind of laughed at him, and I said, are you done? And he's like, yeah. So I walked away, and he continued to preach. I stood against a wall, and I remember standing against this wall, and as everybody's paying attention to him as he's preaching, I remember challenging God again. And I said, if you're the God that they say you are, not only will you take away every addiction that I have, but you will stop me from touching my beautiful wife. You know, and at that moment, I felt God touch me. I felt God touch me. I fell on my knees and I started to worship God, not even knowing who God was. I started to worship God, and as I started to worship Him, I felt something come over me. And it's nothing that I've ever felt before. You know, I felt something come over me, and as I felt something come over me, my highness had gone away. The lights were so much brighter. The colors inside the building, the flags that they have hanging up, just everything looked so much brighter. And as all these things looked so much brighter, I knew that there was a God. I knew that there was a God. You know, at that moment I got up, and I remember being a changed person and saying, I'll never go back to being the person that I was. I mean, you're talking about seconds. I had gone to programs. I had spoken to counselors. I had gone through all kinds of stuff. I had committed suicide. They had people put me in the psycho ward, speak to me, talk to me. Nothing had changed me. Just one challenge. I challenged God, and God touched me, and God set me free. I walked out of that place telling my wife, you know what? I'm done. My wife laughed at me. She laughed at me. I went home and I grabbed all my dickies and all my flannels, and I had, I've never been in prison in my life. I've been in and out of jail all my life. But I had guys that would go to prison because of stuff that they had done for me. They were giving me prison jackets. To them it means something. They said, Frank, this is for you. I grabbed all this stuff. I threw it in the trash. I said, I no longer need this stuff. I had a car that my wife said, she said, I love this car more than her. And it was a Lincoln lowrider, all fixed up. And I gave my car away. And it blew her mind, and she says, what are you doing? I said, this is to show you that I don't love that car more than I love you. I love you. And I came home one day and she had packed up and left. And I couldn't understand why all these things were happening to me. Okay, now I've changed my life. I'm no longer a drug addict. I'm telling you, I went home. I never touched another drug, never touched another beer, never touched anything, because that's who I was. I was an alcoholic. I was a drug addict. I was an abusive husband. No longer. She had packed up and she had left. But the thing was that God wanted to mold me. God wanted to make me the person that He wanted me to be. See, I couldn't understand these things. I'm out there, doing stuff, trying to work, trying to do the best I can. I have 4 daughters from my previous marriage. I ended up losing everything. I lost my home. I lost my cars. I lost everything I had. And I was yelling out to God and saying, why? Why now? When I was a drug dealer, when I was out there doing these things, I had all these material things. Why now? But God was trying to mold me. Through the process of all these things, man. Through the process of, I ended up living in a guy's laundry room with my 4 daughters. At the time, living in this laundry room, I remember a knock at the door, answering the door. My wife's at the door. I said, what are you doing here after 6 months of being separated? She says, I'm moving in with you. I said, you can't move in with me. Now, my wife comes from a good home. She didn't have to come there. But she said, you know what? I'm moving in with you. God had spoken to her. God had molded her because she wasn't coming to church at the time. God was speaking to her in her time. And God had remolded her. She came, she lived with me in this laundry room for 2 months. Someone heard about me. Some lady didn't even go to church. Some lady just overheard someone speaking about me. She calls me. She says, look, man, I have a house. I don't know who you are, but I hear that you have some kids and you need a place to stay. She goes, I have a house that's abandoned. I want you to go look at it. If it works for you, you can move into the house. This house was abandoned, no windows, no anything. I ended up moving into this house with my kids. 6 months later, the lady says, you know what, you fix it up. I'm not going to charge you any rent. And you fix up the house while you fix it. Then when it's fixed, then we'll talk about the rent. I fix up the house in 6 months. She comes out, she charges me $250 a month. I remember in rent, which was nothing.
Yeah.
And then eventually I end up going to her house. She asked me, she goes, you're a tile setter. I want you to come and do some work for me. I went and did some work for her. She never paid me, never anything. I went to church. I said, you know what, it doesn't really matter. She let me live here for 6 months. I'm telling you, I came home from a service one day. I heard a knock at the door, and it was a lady from Century 21. She says, are you Frank Romero? I said, yeah. She goes, do you know Paola? And I said, yes, she's the owner of this house. She says, well, she's signing the house over to you to take over the loan. She says she's going to sell you the house for $30,000. Now she sells me this little, it was a little house, it was a little townhome, but I mean $30,000. My credit was shot. She says, don't worry about it. She co-signed for you. I said, I have no money for a down payment. She says, all the work you did in her house, she said, that's your down payment. And so God is moving in my life. He's blessing me. He really is blessing me. As time goes by, my marriage is just getting stronger. My relationship with my kids is getting stronger. Today I tell you, I have 9 kids. I have 15 grandkids. I'm blessed. Yeah. My 8th daughter just graduated. It's a blessing for a man that never had an education. My son works at Banner Hospital. My daughter runs a doctor's office. My other ones are in the military, doing their thing. But the thing is that God has blessed me. Curses have been broken. Like I said, we just celebrated our 27th anniversary, me and my wife. We renewed our vows 2 years ago. It's just such a blessing. God has restored what the enemy has taken away. The world has taken everything from me, but yet God has replaced it and given me something better. The thing is that we have to reach out. We have to go out there and get it. Nobody's going to give it to us. God is waiting with open arms. He says, come to me and I will give you all things. He says, ask and you shall receive. The thing is that so many of us, we're just out there and because of our pride, because of our own selfish pride, we don't want to go out there and reach out. You know, there's many people out there like you, like what you do, you know, helping children, you know, this program that you're doing. I mean, it's all for a good reason. It's all for a good reason, that people understand that if they believe in themselves, it is possible. It is possible. Anything is possible. But you gotta reach for the stars. You know, don't ever think that you let yourself down. I remember when my son started going to school to be a doctor. I said, he goes, Dad, this is what I want to do. I said, fine, I'll back you up any way I can. He started to go to school. He works at Banner Hospital, like I said, so he's going to college. He's going to Banner Hospital. It's taken him a few years. He's still in college. You know, he's 27 years old now. But I always told him, I said, don't ever feel that you've failed just because you didn't accomplish what you wanted to accomplish in life. You're doing what you have to do. You reach for the stars, but you know what? You grab what you can. You grab what you can, and when you grab it, run with it. Run with it, and be proud of what you've done. Because there's so many people out there that have the opportunity to do so many things, yet do nothing with it. They do nothing with it. Yeah. You know.
Wow, that's amazing, man. Thank you so much. Great story. Just final question.
Yes.
What impact do you want to have on the world?
What kind of impact do I want to have in the world? I want to be able to leave a legacy behind. I'm not worried, you know, I just preached a sermon the other day and I said to people, what's important, the day you were born / the day you died? What's really important is the slash in between. It's what did I leave behind? I want to be able to leave a legacy and show people that, you know what, you can change. You know, you can be a better person. I don't want people to remember the person I used to be. I want them to remember the person that I am today. Because that's what God's done in my life. He's restored me. I want people to understand that this nation was built under God. And it needs to stand that way. We need to be an example. We need to reach for the stars.
Excellent. Frank, thank you so much.
Thank you very
I
much,
really
my brother. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Well, you guys heard it. Great, very inspirational today. Check us out next time on your show, where we'll be having another great guest, and we'll see you soon. Peace.